When it comes to PC gaming, the easiest way to do it is get a low-profile graphics card and slap it in a pre-built computer. But those graphics cards are often sold for quite the premium. So the question today is there an Nvidia option you can buy for just $15 that's actually able to do some pretty decent gaming? Now, while clearing through some graphics cards, I actually came across something that looked a little bit interesting, and it was a graphics card we'd looked at before, but only in the system it arrived in, which was an old Novatech gaming PC we picked up last year for next to nothing. But the thing is, I started looking around online at how much these things costed, and it turns out you can pick up this graphics card, which actually does look like a competent gaming graphics card, admittedly one that is low profile, and you can pick them up from anywhere from £5 to £15, and this is all over the world. No one seems to want these cards, and they've gone completely under the radar. Yet from what I remember of testing it last year, it wasn't actually too bad of a graphics card. So I want to find out today, for £15, which is the maximum one of these is going to cost you in box, is this possibly the best low-end Nvidia graphics card you can buy? Because when we're talking about small form factor graphics cards, I'm not talking about display adapters like the GT210, 610 or 710, I mean a fully fledged gaming graphics card that was sold to you and was capable of doing some gaming, because this card may very well be the cheapest Nvidia option there is out there that isn't going to cost you an arm or a leg to actually get into using one. So why are none of us actually talking about the GT430 if it's such a viable option? Well, let's be honest, where most people are looking for a smaller or cut-down graphics card that will fit in their small Dell SFF PCs or their HPs or their Lenovo's, something they just turn their office PC into a bit of a gaming machine, most people are tending to opt for an AMD graphics card, especially in this segment of the market. I understand as things go further up, you've got things like the 1050 that's cut down to small form factor, the 1030s, but those are still in the £30 to £100 region depending on what card you're trying to buy. They aren't firmly in the bargain bin territory like these ones are. And when it comes to the history and what actually a GT430 is, well, even then I got a little bit curious on why no one talks about this card. Because looking back at the reviews from the day, which admittedly was a little bit hard in places with some websites not loading and the Wayback Machine going down, but I did manage to do my best to get some info on the card, it seemed relatively popular. But it's the same issue it's facing today. When there's so many good AMD options, why would you go with the Nvidia option? But still, for those people that wanted it, it was exceptional for Blu-ray playback, photo editing, video editing. Generally, as a media center card, it was much more stable and a much better bet than the AMD cards. But as time's gone on and AMD's terascale's been left in the dust, it's got me wondering, despite only being slightly competitive in gaming against the AMD cards of the era, is it actually now surpassing them purely because it's now got better driver support? Because the gaming performance back in the day, you got to remember, people were saying, oh, it's a little bit expensive for £60 or $70, it'd make more sense if it was £50 or $60. But at the same time, we're talking about a cut-down version of the Fermi line, which you could buy for pretty much, in today's terms, next to nothing. And the performance you actually got out of it meant that some people really did enjoy using the graphics card. When you actually look at the specifications on paper though, it is going to seem a little bit strange why I'm actually praising this card already. Keep in mind, I actually know the performance of this card, so there's a reason I'm doing this. Because despite its rather mediocre options on paper, it does quite a lot with them. See, this is the Gigabyte version, which is pretty much one of the standard versions out there, just they've whacked a nicer looking cooler on top. Most of them tend to have very similar specifications to this though, where you're going to be getting a whole 96 shading units, so 96 CUDA cores, you're going to get 1GB of DDR3 memory, some lucky people out there might find one with GDDR5 which will perform better, but a lot of these versions do also come with a 128-bit memory bus, something I'd usually criticise, but given that we're getting more or less cards with, 10, 20 times the performance of this card still coming with a 128-bit memory bus, you've not really got anything to worry about here. Being based on the Fermi architecture, it does come with basic DirectX 12 level support, but it's only basic at that. So it's actually not too bad of a graphics card. It uses around 40 to 50 watts under full load depending on what you're doing with it, and overclocking really doesn't change this performance too much. so this is definitely the cheapest Nvidia actual graphics card that you can whack in any system, and it will just use the PCIe lane power, which is something going forward at least, and the specs, well, I don't think they really reflect just how much performance this thing can offer when you see just 96 CUDA cores. Now, it's worth me noting before we get into the benchmarks or anything like that I have done some overclocking on the card to try and eke out as much performance as we possibly can. It's not exactly the most exciting endeavour in the world, but we did manage to get quite the sizable boost to both the memory and the core clocks on this model, which led to us getting a legendary score in 3DMark's Time Spy. So just some proof it can run DirectX 12, but given it was running at 1 frame per second, it gives you an idea of the kind of performance you'll be getting if you run it into a very heavy DirectX 12 application. Of course, this is very much game-to-game dependent. When it came to actually running older tests like Firestrike, which is DirectX 11 and where these cards really excel, well, the performance wasn't too bad either. It's also worth keeping in mind that thanks to this overclock, we were able to score legendary in both of these, so that's a new record for me thanks to the GT430. That's what I mean when I say there are actually no one using these, and you can set records because no one has bothered to try them. Either way, it was relatively stable getting to this point, and it's worth me noting, one of the reasons why this probably seems like a much better alternative to at least using an AMD Terascale version of a card like this, is the drivers are absolutely fantastic. I do praise Fermi 1 and 2's final drivers for being excellent, and even on the low-end display adapters like this, well, they are absolutely perfect. You will not run into any problems with old titles or new titles. In fact, these drivers are probably in some ways better than the newest Nvidia drivers, because those ones can't launch Crysis properly, and these ones, well, these ones can. So we've got a niche use case sorted. This is for the budget gamer that refuses to buy an AMD graphics card and has to have an Nvidia option. They've only got under £20 or $20 to spend, and it has to fit into a small form factor PC. That is quite the narrow market for one of these things, but personally I know it's a market that exists, because every time I cover a good small form factor card, someone will say, well, what if I want Nvidia? Well, if you want Nvidia, I have possibly found you your best option. Do not expect AMD GCN level performance, but what you can expect is a rather surprising turn of performance from what is a 15-year-old graphics card that was budget on launch and is now completely worthless today. So if you want yourself a cheap Nvidia graphics card, maybe it's time to make the decision in the benchmarks. Starting off the benchmarks, we actually saw some really rather good performance with GTA 5 and the Legacy version. Now, it is worth noting that you could probably use the same workarounds that I used on a GTX 480 to make the Enhanced Edition work on this. But really, I would recommend not bothering with that, because at that point you've already bodged in different things to your system that will probably be more powerful just to get the game to launch. So when it comes to the Legacy version, you can enjoy it with normal and high settings in a 720p resolution. This also included soft shadows enabled, and it worked perfectly fine. So GTA 5, which was the first test I actually ran on the card, seems to be offering you really rather decent 720p performance with pretty good averages and pretty good 1% lows. When it came to GTA Online, despite my difficulties trying to find a full lobby, eventually we did manage to get into one. Genuinely, I was leaping from lobby to lobby to lobby just to find people actually online at the time of day I was trying to benchmark this. And we were seeing anywhere from 40 to 60 FPS in smaller lobbies, but that's really not what we're talking about. We're talking about the performance in fully blown out GTA Online with all of the players and all of the nonsense and all the bloat that goes with it. And we saw pretty much the same results as single player, which was really strange. I tried multiple lobbies, which were full out with 32 players, and we saw the same results. So for some reason here, which is something you genuinely do not see on the AMD cards of this era, we saw full utilization with no performance problems in the world of GTA Online, regardless of how many players were actually in-game. So, perfect card if you just want a cheap system to play GTA Online in, I suppose. Now, I didn't hold out a great deal of hope for Counter-Strike 2, given it is a DirectX 12 game, but it actually utilises these Fermi cards really well, and thanks to that driver support, you can actually start these games and play them, unlike the AMD competitor cards that this card would have had back in the day. I mean, talking about cards it's up against today though, there are low-profile AMD cards that can launch this game. This is not a complete win for Nvidia just because this card can manage it. But still, with low settings in 576p, we saw 57 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 41 FPS during the built-in workshop benchmark. Now, when you actually took this and actually went in-game, you'd see anywhere from 60 to 80 FPS a lot of the time, with it dropping down to 40 to 50 FPS when there were lots of players on screen. So Counter-Strike 2, it's not going to look pretty, but you can dump this graphics card into any system and get a system that will now play the game and was pretty controllable. It's not competitive, but I was able to play through a little bit of it absolutely fine. When we started things off with BeamNG, in simpler maps like The Hill, we were able to run the game with low and medium settings in 720p and actually see 34 FPS on average. Now, this goes to show the DirectX 11 support on these cards is always phenomenal, and it always was with the older Nvidia cards. So it does have that going for it here. You can't use the Vulkan render options because these cards don't have Vulkan, and despite the amazing performance we saw on the Hill benchmark, well, when it comes to the more intensive maps, you are reminded that this is a 15-year-old, lower-end graphics card. As the Jungle benchmark, well, we had to use the lowest settings in 576p again to see 36 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 29 FPS. So BeamNG is playable, but if you want to protect your eyes, maybe stick to these simpler maps. Rather than going through and testing a plethora of source games, because I'm going to be very honest with you, if you try and run any of them on this card, you can run most of them with very high settings and see in excess of 100 FPS. Trust me, I tried in Half-Life and Counter-Strike, and you've got no problems whatsoever. So to really stress things out and push it to its limits on the source engine, we're running Black Mesa with the Zen level. Now, we did have to use a mixture of potato, low and medium settings just to configure things to work best on the card, but even then, with these beautiful visuals we had on screen, we were still seeing anywhere from 50 to 60 FPS when not much was going on, and down to 33 FPS when you were in heavy action. So Black Mesa's Zen levels are completely playable, and earlier levels of the game would run in excess of 60 to 100 FPS, as you'd expect from a graphics card like this. So Black Mesa, perfect experience, just you will be using DirectX 9 and not Vulkan here once again. When it comes to Mount & Blade Bannerlord, which is a game that's very easy to sink plenty of hours into, we had absolutely no problems running it with the lowest settings in 720p. Once again, a testament to this game's optimizations, but also thanks to the fantastic DirectX 11 capabilities of this graphics card, it ran it fine with no hitches or stutters. Despite this being a slightly lower than I'd like frame rate for this type of game, it was fully controllable with very good frame times. And it's also worth noting that in earlier parts of the game and smaller battles, you'd be seeing anywhere from 60 to 80 FPS. It's only these large battles with about 180 to 250 people going on it where you'll be seeing these lower results. But I did go through and complete a battle, and yes, it is fully controllable, so Mount & Blade Bannerlord is playable, albeit a little bit ugly and a little bit slow in places. When it comes to the most optimized game I've tested recently with Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes, well, the game defaulted to very high settings in 720p. And I thought, you know what, we've had such good experiences trying to get this game to run on things recently, that why don't we just see how the game runs with these settings? And it was absolutely correct with its optimization because it ran at 36 FPS on average with excellent frame times. The 1% lows were down to 32 FPS, but it would very rarely stray away from the average, so Metal Gear Solid 5 looks absolutely excellent, and these are the settings it chose to use right out of the box. Newer, simpler titles like RimWorld, well, you can enjoy the game with a fully locked 60 FPS. It's worth noting that if you see any frame drops here in the benchmark, they are not due to the graphics card, they're due to me using the speed up function of the game and it, of course, bringing the processor down to a crawl. So when it comes to just displaying a game like this, well, the GT430 isn't going to be having any problems in anything up to 1080p. I'd imagine if you move things up to 1440p or 4K, it'd put enough load on the graphics card to maybe cause a bit of slowdown due to the 3D elements in the game, but really, you're going to be able to play this absolutely fine. The highly requested Project Zomboid though ran with medium and high settings in 720p with a fully locked 60 FPS. It did for some reason insist that MSI Afterburner would be present on the left hand side of the screen right in the middle, so that's just where it is for this benchmark. But I played through a good chunk of the game, surviving around and doing a few little bits and pieces, just carrying on the same save we've been using for a little while now, and we saw 60 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 58 FPS. It was pretty much a fully locked 60 FPS experience. You could go to a higher resolution, but it would lock you to around 30 FPS, or at least that was the best way to do it in 1080p, was to lock the frame rate to 30 FPS, so really 720p, medium and high settings, and Project Zomboid was completely playable. Your games like Oblivion, Skyrim Anniversary, all of those types of games will be playable with lower settings, but the one that is always a monumental pain to get running is Fallout 4. Well, with low settings in 720p, we did manage to average 35 FPS, with 1% lows down to 26 FPS when we were using our benchmark, which is involving combat in a town and city, which is probably as intensive as the game gets. When you're in smaller, more enclosed areas or just out in the wasteland, this would bounce back up to 40 to 60 FPS. So this really is just a stress test of the worst performance you're going to see out of the card, which for a Bethesda title is pretty playable. You're not going to be able to fix the frame pacing because this game is just random with how it wants to work on various hardwares, but there you go, Fallout 4 will indeed run. When it comes to city builders, really I'd be sticking to SimCity 4 or SimCity 2013 on a graphics card like this, purely because I think they look a little bit nicer, but City Skylines will run with lower settings in 720p, and you can keep a few enhancements turned on, but we'll have to turn off things like shadows and turn down the level of detail to the lower options. We saw 36 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 27 FPS, and overall I had a pretty good time playing it. I always end up with around 20 minutes of benchmark footage whenever we test City Skylines, or any city builder for that matter. So yes, City Skylines is playable, and you could probably get away with building quite a big city before you see the performance start dropping down to unplayable levels. One of the big reasons to be buying a card like this though isn't for a lot of these brand new 3D titles, despite the fact it can run them. It'd be something for like Minecraft, where you can run it with fancy settings in 1080p and see well over 120 FPS a lot of the time. There was no problems running this game on this card, and I do have to give them credit here. Being an OpenGL title, that is something these old Fermi cards always used to deal with impeccably. They were just really good at OpenGL and DirectX, so it's just something they really had going for them, and it goes to show. Still in Minecraft in 2025, we're seeing the game being completely playable. So if you just want a cheap Nvidia graphics card that can play Minecraft, well, this will fit in any system, and it's certainly going to be a lot nicer than using a GT 210. But finally, where would we be without testing Crysis? Well, we were able to run the game with medium and high settings, and I've also included a little bit down in the bottom left that says DirectX 10, because Nvidia still hasn't fixed their latest drivers that mean their new cards won't work on DirectX 10, so this is better than an RTX 4090 or 5090 or whatever the latest graphics card is. This is technically able to run Crysis at higher settings than they are. Well, a newer API that is. We still had medium and high settings in 720p and saw 47 FPS on average. So this got me wondering whether maybe things had improved with drivers, because I saw people reviewing this card on their websites back in the day claiming they couldn't get more than 13 FPS out of the card. So they must have either been asking for ultra settings, or maybe the drivers were bad or something like that, I don't know. Either way, Crysis here ran perfectly fine. So there we have it, the benchmarks. And there's a couple of ways we can look at this. For what is a £15 graphics card you can whack in any system, well, the performance isn't actually too bad. It can play most of the most popular titles out there with decent settings. I mean, Counter-Strike 2, sure, it's not going to look great, but it is playable and it is controllable. So for a graphics card you can whack in any system that you can pick up for £5 to £15, well, that's not bad performance. I can't really complain. The performance across the board for what this graphic card is was good. I can't really argue with it. Where I could argue is by saying that there are better AMD alternatives. Takes the R7 350, the R7 450, those weird later OEM rebrands that came out a few years ago. Well, we've been seeing them in the sub £10 market for the last year, and really the performance there is just far better than this is. So I suppose it's a bit of a weird one, because it's not bad performance, but really, you're still paying for a brand name. And that's the only thing this card's really got going for it in terms of the overall performance. It's got the Nvidia brand name and maybe better OpenGL support. But to give the card some redeeming qualities, it did actually deal with console emulation really well. It's not exactly the most spectacular thing in the world, but back in the day people were saying, you know what, for a cheap emulation box, this thing's low power, it's got good API support, and it can work in any system. So it's almost prime material for an emulation cabinet or something like that. And my experience in 2025? Well, things up to the Wii, well, they run absolutely fine. Wii, GameCube, anything prior, depending on the game title and console you're targeting, you could target anywhere between 720p to 1080p with various enhancements like anti-aliasing, anisotropic filtering, just things that you want to make the games look better without any problems whatsoever. So it's nice to see the card actually has some redeeming qualities when it comes to emulation. I'm not too sure how well this fares against its AMD competition, but given how much of these things could be on a card-to-card basis, well, I'm going to give it some actual props here. It did well with emulation. So there we have it, Nvidia's GT430, and it's probably a card that has been worth looking at, especially one that I've looked at while I'm ill at the moment, just because I can't film any big videos. I can manage some smaller graphics card videos, but honestly the big project's going to have to wait till next week when I feel a little bit better. But for now, at least we've come across what is a good value, small form factor graphics card that anyone all over the world can get a hold of and enjoy some of the most popular titles out there without stretching the budget too much. Now really, you would have to be a bit of an Nvidia fanboy to go after one of these cards, when the AMD cards, at least the ones from the GCN range, think the R7 450, R7 350, any of the rebrands of a HD 7750 would be better than this graphics card in virtually every way. But I suppose if you're desperate for a graphics card that will function in any system, specifically a small form factor, and you need a half-height graphics card, then it's not half bad of an option. Just I'd say to look for the AMD options first that we've covered previously on the channel, because as much as I understand there are fanboys, if you are spending 15 quid, just get whatever graphics card works better. It doesn't matter if it's Nvidia, AMD, this is not a fanboy territory, this is bargain bin territory. Just buy whichever graphics card you can find that performs best. I don't mind the GT430, and I'm glad I've covered it. It's a good option. So if this is all you can find, you can do some gaming on it. Get the AMD card first, and then get this one second. But if you're desperate for an Nvidia card, well, it's not half bad. Anyway, thank you all very much for watching, I hope you all enjoyed, and good night.